Alright everyone, it's time for a cool recap of everything that has happened in the Curse of Strahd so far. So, it all began. Your collection of gnomes and others left Cornburg for a logging camp in the Shimmering Wood, after the camp stopped sending logs downriver and rumors of strange attacks were heard. Upon arrival at the camp, several of the loggers had gone missing. One stumbled back from the woods, nearly dead. The next morning, every logger had been killed, poisoned overnight by Orin Timbers, leader of the expedition, and thus revealed a member of the Trust, the Gnomish State's secret police. He indicated that the loggers were beyond saving, and that this action was necessary to prevent further loss of life. But before he could get too much into the details, a thick mist began to surround the mill at the center of the log camp. Something, or some things, strange of form and deep in terror, emerged from the mist and trapped the expedition in the mill. The mill was set aflame, and a few survivors of the expedition leapt from the roof into the mists. You followed the path toward the river, but the river never appeared. You walked through the mist for hours, days, until finding yourselves outside an old, dilapidated house, the architecture of which was unlike anything you had ever seen before. There outside, a younger boy cries, while his older sister tells him that he needs to be brave and try to be quiet. These children, Rosavalda and Thornbolt, say there's some terrible monster inside their house, and that their parents have trapped this monster in the basement. Their youngest brother, Walter, just a baby, is up on the third floor. The gnomes and others explore the strange house. The house had been kept in quite good repair, but was also seemingly quite empty. Nearing the third floor, however, Cole examines a decorative suit of armor and suddenly springs to life and attempts to kill him. The armor is crushed and crumpled. Continuing to explore the house, in a nursery, there appeared a spectral nursemaid. She was avoided, and further along in the library, a hidden passage was discovered that had a note seemingly to the occupants of this house, identified as the family Resnick, from the noble lord of this land, with threats both veiled and explicit contained within this letter. The expedition continued upstairs into the attic, where a locked room was discovered. Inside the room were two small skeletons, and the phantoms of the children before appeared, but with no recollection of meeting you. After a bit of conversation, Rose stepped into Wozniak, and Thorn into Andar, and Rose/Wozniak hurried toward a hidden staircase and down into the house's basement. The basement of the house seemed hollowed out of the earth, with rough-hewn walls held up by wooden beams. The howling of the monster the children mentioned earlier could be heard, and the group hurried directly toward it. They found an altar with Chomsky suspended on chains above it. Moving toward her, cloaked figures appeared around the room, chanting, "One must die. One must die." Joff climbed onto the altar and released Chomsky, and upon setting her down, the howling intensified, and the figures disappeared, replaced by a thing made of darkness and bones, rising from the waters on the far side of the room. The group ran, but Joff chose to stand his ground and tried to attack the entity, and in return, he was seized by it and disappeared into its dark embrace with the crunching sounds of bone and armor splintering. Everyone else fled back up to the attic and discovered the house itself had turned against them, with doors replaced by swinging blades and the fireplaces belching thick black smoke. Upon reaching the third-floor landing, the spirit of Thorn leapt from Andar's body upon the sight of the crushed and broken Sir Tinhart. At this, Rose left Wozniak as well. The group found a balcony off the nursery and leapt down onto the ground, spotting a somber Rose and Thorn looking at them across the threshold before the door to the house slammed shut. Looking around, they saw the mists had receded, and the group was in a small village that they did not recognize. They would come to know this village as Barovia. You explore Barovia, and ultimately, in the Blood on the Vine Tavern, meet the recently ascended burgomaster of this village, Ismark Kolyanovich. Ismark has been burgomaster for a total of 3 days, as his father, Kolyan Indirovich, passed away after nightly assaults on their home by wolves and worse things. Ismark believes his sister, Irina Kolyana, is the focus of these attacks, and that the threat is directed by the lord of this land, Strahd von Zarovich. He wished for Irina to leave Barovia and find somewhere safer to remain. But, as per the customs of their people, she cannot leave their home until their father has been laid to rest in the village's cemetery. The group meets Irina at the burgomaster's mansion and agrees to help bring the father's body to the churchyard. These people seem to revere the Morning Lord, and funerary rites are conducted just at the break of dawn. Arriving at the church itself, a broken and dilapidated thing, the village's priest, Father Donovich, seems distracted and distant. A screaming voice from the church's undercroft begs for release, shouting that it is starving. Father Donovich, not regarding this screaming at all, seemingly, says he will begin the rites at dawn, or shortly before dawn, and that assistance will be needed then. Upon exiting the church, the group sees a large white wolf, itself nearly the size of a horse, digging at the earth in the graveyard. It looks at you and then turns and walks off, disappearing behind the church. Looking where the wolf was digging, a small hand suddenly bursts from the ground. In a flash, Chomsky draws steel and slashes the hand off at the wrist, at which point Joff's screams, choked by grave dirt, can be heard from beneath the freshly disturbed soil. He's dug from the earth and brought into the church, where Father Donovich can do little for him beyond bind his wound. Joff's severed hand falls between the floorboards, where the thing in the undercroft takes a bite before rejecting it. You all leave, and quickly. Cole, as a favor to Irina, helps Father Donovich complete the rites at dawn, and Kolyan Indirovich is laid to rest. The group leaves Barovia with Irina, walking along the old Svalich road as the mists hang on the trees that loom above the path. In the distance, Barovia drowns in the shadow of Castle Ravenloft. Traveling the old Svalich road, the group encounters a small band of Vistani, a people who seemingly travel the roads of this land, more broadly itself, also known as Barovia, without fear of harm. In contrast to the Barovians, they are a colorful and cheerful group, and welcome you all into their circle of wagons. You are offered food and drink and except for Joff, as the mere smell of the food makes him instantly nauseous. After some celebrating, the Vistani say that one of their number, Madame Eva, was expecting the group's arrival and requires their attendance. She consulted the tarot for the group and spoke of things that fate declared must be. After leaving the Vistani camp, the group made their way to the top of Serre Falls, where they found themselves pursued by animated corpses. Through steel, magic, and some unceremonious hurling off of the bridge spanning the falls, the animated bodies were dispatched. Dawn, or the faded hollow gray that passes for dawn in this land, breaks on Serre Falls, and you all find, in the night, scarecrows have appeared on the far side of the bridge. They spring to life, vicious and savage, but further applications of shoving and a bit of fire dispatches them. Joff still hasn't eaten anything, and seems to grow more pallid and weak. The group continues along the old Svalich road, and chooses to follow a fork toward an old windmill, perhaps led there by a deed to a windmill found in Resnick House. A madly squawking crow leads the group away from the windmill toward a set of standing stones, in the center of which was a number of human teeth. The group then approached the windmill, and Endar recognized a cart he had seen in the village of Barovia, where an old woman had led away a child as she pushed this cart. You all knocked on the front door of the windmill, and as the door opened, the smell of the most delicious, warm, inviting pastries burst forth. A middle-aged woman with a flour-dusted apron was inside. Most went inside, but a few remained outdoors, and Cole climbed up to the second-story window. He was stopped upon seeing another woman, older this time, who spotted him and used some sorcery to turn him into a frog. She shouted for her daughters, who also attempted to render unconscious or otherwise incapacitate the rest of the group. Wozniak and Joff managed to flee into the woods, with the rest taken into the windmill by these women who were clearly more than just bakers. Wozniak returns from the woods in the dark of night and finds everyone has been suspended on the second floor of the windmill by chains. He briefly investigates a further third floor and finds several children in cages, prodded by the women, and hurries back downstairs. He works on getting everyone free and discovers that they are all covered in various pastry crumbs. Chomsky and Cole experience terrifying, impossibly vivid dreams that turn into nightmares. Chomsky's attempt to lead a group of gnomes to safety via boat becomes terrible and dark, and Cole's adoring public turns ugly. As everyone is about to leave, the women notice and begin pursuit. Some foul, half-formed creature stumbles out of a boiling kettle and after them, but the group manages to get away into the woods. Flight continues until the group finds a coal burner shack to hold up in for the night. In the middle of the night, while eating grubs and moss scavenged by Kelda, there is the sound of footsteps outside the hut. Trevelyan, a member of the initial ill-fated expedition from Kornberg, is there, asking for shelter. He's invited inside and explains that he also lost the group in the mist and wandered in the woods for some indeterminate amount of time, pursued by the howling of wolves and worse. And then he came upon the Skullburner's hut. The group leaves and continues through the Old Svalich Wood on foot, hoping to end up in the larger settlement of Vallaki. As the group crosses a small stream, Trevelyan suddenly turns and attacks Wozniak, hands ending in talons, a mouth wide and now full of vicious fangs. A tussle ensues until Irina shouts to throw him into the river. He is tackled and dragged bodily into the stream, where he screams and literally dissolves in your fingers. Soaked and gasping, the group continues to tromp through the woods, eventually spilling onto the road again. It is followed toward the gates of what can only be Vallaki. There is a rather loud man in an oversized crimson hat sitting next to a wagon with Rictavio's Carnival of Wonders emblazoned on the side. The man quickly makes himself known as the eponymous Rictavio. He puts on a traveling circus and has come to Barovia seeking new wonders. He allows you all to sleep beneath his wagon that night as snow begins to fall. After bargaining with some Vallaki guardsmen for entrance, the group arrives within the city, or rather town. You head for the town's only place of lodging, the Blue Water Inn, along with Rictavio. His wagon is too large to be boarded at the inn, so it is led off while everyone else is given rooms. The innkeepers, Danica and Irvin Martikov, along with their children Brom and Bray, welcome you. Inside the inn are also a pair of wolf hunters and two younger men, already well into their cups by midday. This pair, Nikolai and Karl Wachter, become quite fond of Wozniak and his stories, christening him Old Boy. The group learns of a church where Joff is taken to seek some kind of shelter and healing. Chomsky remains at the church, welcomed by its shepherd, Father Petrovich. The vicar confesses to Chomsky, one person of faith to another, that something bleak has come upon the church. The holy relic of the bones of Saint Andral himself, upon which the church was originally erected, have gone missing. After a discussion with a nervous altar boy, Chomsky discovers the church's gravedigger and general laborer Milivoj might know where they are. On the way back from the church, the group finds itself tailed by a man who, upon being cornered by Andar, identifies himself as Ernst. He is in the ploy of Lady Fiona Wachter, a noblewoman of Vallaki, who is interested in the arrival of you outsiders. She invites you to dine with her this evening. Lady Wachter explains that the burgomaster of Vallaki, Baron Vargas Valakovich, is both a capricious and incompetent leader. She says he throws continual and pointless festivals, effectively thumbing his nose at Strahd Vanzarovich, and it is only a matter of time before Strahd eventually tires of the Baron's flailing gestures. He's also a paranoid and cruel man, more than willing to punish or exile anyone who questions his authority. The group leaves after dinner, but Andar hangs back outside Wachter House, and before too long sees a number of cloaked figures leaving Lady Wachter's home. Both Joff and Chomsky say at the Church of St. Andral. Chomsky continues to be haunted by dreams of a nightmare sea. Upon waking in the morning, she finds Father Petrovich has banned Joff and says he is no longer welcome. Chomsky goes to the home of Milivoj and discovers that he did indeed take the bones and was paid to do so by the town's coffin maker, Henrik van der Voort. Henrik is now in possession of these bones. She rendezvous with Joff, who seemingly is feeling much, much better. Separately, everyone else decides that it would be wise to meet Baron Balakovich and not simply take Lady Wachter at her word. Upon entering the Baron's home, they see preparation for the festival has begun, and more shockingly, the leader of the original expedition from Korenberg, Orin Timbers, is sitting in the Baron's den. He recounts a similar tale to Trevlin, but thoroughly, verifiably, is alive. Upon meeting the Baron, the group discovers he is indeed as paranoid and cruel a man as indicated. They also meet his thuggish one-armed enforcer Izek Strazini. Somehow, Cole and Andar end up obligated to helping the Baron create the most spectacular festival Vallaki has ever seen. Plans for the Festival of the Blazing Sun are drawn up. Joff attempts to undermine the Baron's authority to his face and is unceremoniously thrown in the stockade. After several hours of agonizing restraint, Bray Martikov comes and picks his locks, setting him and the rest of the imprisoned townspeople free. After connecting at the Blue Water Inn, Chomsky and Joff head to the coffin maker's shop and confront Henrik. He basically tells them to get lost. Chomsky and Joff fetch the town guard and convince them to bring Henrik to the Baron. One of the guardsmen is convinced, manipulated, to go upstairs and to retrieve the bones after Henrik reveals that they are hidden in the false bottom of a wardrobe, but the guardsman does not return. The other guardsman is certainly unwilling to follow, and he leaves, saying that he will leave further decisions about this place up to the Baron. The group reconnects and decides to return to the coffin maker's shop and get the bones themselves. On the way to the coffin makers, you see a stockyard where Octavio's wagon is being kept. Attempting to investigate it, something large and smelling of wet animal appears to be inside, and it growls loudly upon being disturbed. The group hightails it as the stockyard's owners come to see what the commotion is. They continue on to the coffin maker's shop, and upstairs they find a dusty attic full of boxes, crates, timber, and sawdust, with a wheezing, injured guardsman on the far end of the room. Nearing him, the crates burst open, flinging grave dust in the air, and through the haze leap 6 hissing creatures of various races and garments, but sharp of talon and fang, not unlike Trevlin. The group makes a stand, but is clearly overwhelmed, falling back, mostly by leaping out of a window. Kelda makes a run for the bones, while Cole stands between the creatures and the door. Cole falls, his throat torn open as his lifeblood drips through the floorboards into the coffin maker's workshop. The group flees across the street into several abandoned homes. The creatures briefly pursue, but seemingly cannot enter the structures, and disappear shortly thereafter. You all reconvene at the Blue Water Inn, and plan to separate to attempt to discover the location of the 9 of Swords tarot card, presumably the Baron's Manor. Chomsky returns the bones of St. Andral to their church, and has her first peaceful night of sleep since leaving the windmill. That evening, the Blue Water Inn is visited by a pair of Vistani men, looking for a lost child who had disappeared from their camp. The next morning, as the group prepares to leave, they encounter a local fisherman who the Martikovs had mentioned was normally a regular, but they hadn't seen in quite some time. He is called Bluto, and is found walking in a daze down the main Vallaki thoroughfare carrying a large sack. He's incapacitated, and the group finds the missing Vistana, Arabella, within this sack. Andar heads for Baron Valakovich's manor, and upon informing the Baron that Cole was sick at the inn, the Baron immediately dispatches Izek to find him and bring him to complete the festival preparations, regardless of his well-being. Knowing that time was fleeting on this lie, Andar excused himself to find a bucket for Cole's imagined sick, and quickly scouted the manor, finding an attic with a wooden door near the far end, with some strange chanting coming from behind it. Izek arrives at the Blue Water Inn furious, and is demanding to see Cole, but Chomsky is the only one there, aside from the innkeepers and the other regulars. Izek tosses Cole's old room and nearly comes to blows with Irvin when Izek sees Irina come down the stairs. His demeanor changes completely, and after staring at Irina for several minutes, he leaves without a further word. The rest of the group sees him walking back to the Baron's manor, and Wozniak attempts to influence him magically, but Izek is distracted and returns to the manor without giving them a second thought. Without any way to delay, the festival begins, and Valakovich and his retinue all leave the manor. The group enters the manor and finds Henrik beaten and chained up in a closet on the second floor. He is released and encouraged to seek Lady Voctor. You all reach the attic and find a door with a large skull carved into it and a sign reading, "All is not well." The door is opened anyway, at which point a conjured lightning bolt tore through the group. The door is then kicked open to find some kind of magical experimentations, several animated skeletons of cats, and 3 small figures facing into the corner of the room. Thanks to some unusually effective divination, the conjurer responsible was located, and while he attempted to defend himself with magic, Kelda drove her sword into his gut. His sorcery dispelled, it seemed to be Viktor Vlachovich, the Baron's son. The group took the hilt of an enchanted sword, seemingly the object indicated by the 9 of Swords card, and fled the manor. Meanwhile, Chomsky, Irina, and Arabella attend the Festival of the Blazing Sun, as all in Vallaki are demanded to do so. The festival proceeds with muted, forced attendance. Lacking both Andar and Cole, the Baron pulls Chomsky onto the stage and says that even outsiders seek refuge in Vallaki, for there is no safe haven to be found anywhere in this land. As he turns to light the great wicker sun, a ball of slushy snow strikes his torch and snuffs it out. He jabs ineffectively at the ball, and a guardsman laughs reactively. The crowd goes as silent as the grave. The guardsman is dragged on stage by Izek, and he is bound hand and foot to the saddle horn of the Baron's horse. As he is about to be dragged, a roar issues across the plaza. A huge bear lopes into the square and makes a line straight toward Arabella. In this commotion, Izek begins moving toward Irina. Chomsky looks at both and makes a choice. Leaping onto the Baroness's horse, Arabella is pulled up into the saddle by Chomsky, as Irina is hauled away by Izek. Chomsky leads the bear away from the square, as it empties in panicked screams, eventually losing the bear down some alleyway. Chomsky deposits Arabella at the Church of St. Andral, and then returns to the manor to see the rest of the group climbing down a rope out of the attic. Chomsky attempts to return the Baroness's horse, only to discover that the Baroness herself was just left at the festival stage. Returning to the square, Chomsky retrieves Baroness Vlachovich and returns her to her manor. Chomsky also notices a small doll had been dropped in the square, and upon picking it up, discovers it has a striking resemblance to Irina. The rest of the group, after leaving the manor, passes a stockyard where Octavio's wagon was stored. Now the wagon is conspicuously empty, with nothing but a small doll, seemingly of a Vistana, inside. The group returns to the coffin maker's shop and confirms that Cole indeed lies dead upstairs, his body starting to turn. Shortly thereafter, they see Octavio leading a huge bear, wearing a similar version of a hat otherwise identical to his, down the lane. A hunk of raw meat is enough to tempt Vasha away, back into the wagon. Returning, Octavio encounters Chomsky and says that the rest of the group are back at the coffin maker shop. The group reassembles, and looking at the strange pair of dolls, the group heads to Blinsky's toy shop. There, Blinsky confesses that he has indeed been making dolls for Izek, of an ever greater specificity and detail for literally years. Octavio has also traded his monkey to Blinsky in exchange for a parrot named Marnius and that Vistana doll. After this, the group decides to visit Lady Voctor as Octavio announces his desire to leave Vallaki post-haste. Joff communes with his patron and through clever use of prayer is able to communicate with Irina, who says she is unharmed but in some darkened room that smells of piss. At Voctor House, Lady Voctor says that clearly Vlachovich is no longer suitable to govern Vallaki, and tomorrow, a bold pronouncement from Henrik and Chomsky will be more than enough to turn the townspeople against their burgomaster. Mentioning seeking somewhere that reeks of piss, Lady Voctor identifies an old tanner shop. En route to the tannery, Bram Martikov arrives with another friend of the Martikov family, a very large but very ugly man named Grim, who has been set to provide them with assistance. At the tannery, the group enters through a second-story window and confronts Izek, who has trapped the ceiling with bottles of flammable oil. As the jars shatter on the ground, a terrible arm erupts from the knot of scar tissue on Izek's shoulder. Made of rough, dark skin and ending in wicked claws, he is able to hurl from the palm of his hand fire, igniting the oil. The group brings the fight to him when suddenly 3 of the creatures from the coffin maker's shop appear and steal Irina from Izek. They attempt to flee with her, but Kelda's new sunblade goes through their pallid flesh like a knife through butter left in the sun. The creatures are rendered to ash, and Izek to unconsciousness. Through discussing things with Grim, it is revealed that when Izek was a child, upon returning from fishing on Lake Zarovich, he, his sister, and his uncle were set upon by wolves. The uncle and sister were killed, and Izek had his arm torn off. His parents died of their grief, leaving Izek an orphan, mocked for his disability and dead family. But being the large boy he was, he defended himself by whatever means necessary. One day this went too far, but after being taken to the Baron, he was granted clemency in exchange for joining the Baron's household and enforcing his decrees. The group leaves Izek with Lady Wachter, and the next morning, a crowd of villagers gather in the town square. Lady Wachter pronounces that the Baron is endangering them all, and Henrik and Chomsky join her on stage with their stories. An angry mob is stirred up, and they charge off for the Baron's manor. The group quickly returns to the Blue Water Inn, collecting their gear. Irvin Martikov also mentions that he has been expecting wine from people he knows at the Wizard of Wine's winery, but it has stopped showing up. He mentions he would certainly be in your debt should you discover what has happened there. Leaving through the Dusk Gate, the group collects Chomsky and Arabella from the Church of St. Andrew, and along with this gnomish paladin is a wooden box with a note saying, "Open outside the city, Rictavia." Leaving through the undefended gate, shortly outside of Alaki, the group does so and discovers that it is stuffed with hay. But below the hay is one of the creatures from the coffin maker's shop. Its hands cut off at the wrists and its feet at the ankles. It has some kind of amulet, perhaps a holy symbol, affixed to its chest, and its mouth is stuffed with something. As Andar recoils in horror, his hand brushes the creature. His mind fills with knowledge and understanding. He grabs quill and parchment from Wozniak and sketches maps upon maps, and then tells you everything about how someone who was once known as Eberhard came to be in this box.